Okay, great. So now I would like to introduce our speakers for today. First, we have John Sandberg. He's an aquatic biologist with the PCA and who's based in Brainerd. John has been at the PCA for 11 years, and his work centers around biological indicators of water quality, specifically stream fish and aquatic macroinvertebrates. So welcome, John. And second, we have Jacqueline Bacigalupi from the Minnesota DNR. Jacqueline grew up in Minnesota, and she holds a bachelor's degree in fish and wildlife and a master's in conservation biology. She's worked for the DNR for 16 years in a variety of fisheries management, habitat, and supervisory positions in 4 different field offices. And she's been the IBI program supervisor in Brainerd for the past 8 years. So welcome, Jacqueline. And now I will turn it over to you guys to start the presentation.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to take the first half of it. Jacqueline and I work in similar programs in different agencies. We do a lot of work collaboratively. The main difference is that the PCA really centers around rivers and streams, and the DNR handles the lake stuff. So rather than kind of reinvent the wheel for both lakes and streams, I'm going to start off talking a little bit about the concepts behind our IBI tools, and I'll talk a little bit about streams specifically, but then I'll pass it off to Jacqueline, who's got some really good specific information about lakes. That's trying to advance slides here.
Oh, no.
Uh-oh.
Oh, interesting. We didn't pass that out, did we?
Have mouse on that screen, maybe? Oh, boy.
Oh, boy. Okay. We're stuck on the screen now. Oh, maybe I just needed to click on it.
This is Jane Hill, yes. You have to turn on the presentation view, and then you'll be able to...
We got it.
All right.
Can you not see the... Yeah, it's on... I think we got it fixed. Can you see the second slide that says overview?
Yes, we can.
Okay, looks perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, this slide I was hoping to show while I was talking earlier, but I think you guys get the point. So everyone who lives in Minnesota knows we have a very water-rich state, but it's still it's staggering to say the numbers. We have 85,000 miles of streams. We have more than 12,000 lakes that are more than 10 acres in size. Nearly 5 million total lake acres, and lots of wetlands too, over 10 million wetland acres. And that's a wealth of water, obviously, and for a long time, the agencies kind of struggled to find a coherent plan to monitor and manage this vast quantity of water. And with the passage of the Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment in 2008, it really provided a good funding source to do this type of work on a statewide scale. And also, it created the Clean Water Council, which provided some good recommendations in terms of how we would carry out that work. And one of the key outcomes of that amendment and the Clean Water Council's recommendations was the watershed approach, which is how we've structured our monitoring and assessment work around the state, monitoring a different set of watersheds every year. We started this in 2006, and we just wrapped up the first statewide cycle in 2017. And what this does is it provides a structure for collecting data on water quality, determining whether these waters are meeting standards, reporting that information back out to the public, and then taking steps to restore and protect those waters. And today we're obviously focusing mostly on the monitoring and assessment piece of this. And one of the really important components of the monitoring piece is biological monitoring. Now, the concept that underlies all of this is the understanding that the organisms, the things, the bugs, the fish, the plants that live in water are reliable indicators of the quality of the water they live in. And so for streams in Minnesota, we use fish and aquatic macroinvertebrates, which are things like aquatic insects, crustaceans, that type of thing. In lakes, we use fish and aquatic plants. And in wetlands, we use aquatic plants and macroinvertebrates. So we've developed tools to look at the types of fish and macroinvertebrates and aquatic plants that live in all these different systems and use the status of those organisms to infer a lot about the water quality and habitat conditions. On the stream side, we've been doing this type of work for more than 20 years. The lakes, you guys, 10 years approximately?
Well, the initial efforts for IBI development was in the 1990s by Mithy Tremmel, but kind of the more recent efforts since the mid-2000s.
Yeah, so we've been at this for quite a while. And not only does this information just provide us with kind of some good to know information about water quality, there's also some actual, federal law that talks about what the expectations are for the quality of waters in the United States. And in the Clean Water Act, it's written right in there that the point of the Clean Water Act was to maintain the biological integrity of the waters across the country. Of course, then you have to ask, what does that mean? And it's defined in there as well. Biological integrity is the capability of supporting and maintaining a balanced, integrated, adaptive community of organisms that has some resemblance to that of natural habitat. So the water quality has to be good enough, and the habitat conditions have to be good enough that it can support a biological assemblage that resembles something that would be there under natural conditions. What that means kind of in practice is as systems become more degraded, the more sensitive and the more sensitive species tend to be reduced in number, or in extreme cases disappear completely. So, for example, in a natural stream, you'd have a large number of species, including a wide variety of habitat specialists, different species that use different types of food resources. You'd have game fish, you'd have minnows, you'd have suckers, and what some people might call rough fish. But as systems become more degraded, you tend to see an overall reduction in the number of species. You tend to see dominance by the most tolerant types of species. In streams, that's often things like bullheads, fathead minnows, green sunfish, or something that tends to really increase under conditions where there's a lot of degradation going on. So that's an example of how biological integrity tends to be reduced in a measurable way as systems become more stressed or degraded. So just to kind of recap, this concept of biological integrity it's important because it tells us a lot about the quality of our water, but it's also an important water quality goal to maintain biological integrity in rivers, streams, and wetlands. And what we're going to talk about today is this tool called the Index of Biological Integrity, which is a quantitative tool that we've developed to put a number on how close we are to hitting those goals of biological integrity. The way an IBI works is we go out and we collect a representative sample of the organisms that live in a water body. For example, here we are electrofishing a stream. We collect all the organisms that we can of all different sizes and shapes and all the different species. We compile the raw data in terms of the number of each species we observed. Those are then translated into what we call metrics, which are combinations of species that share a certain trait. For example, number of predators, the number of species that require gravel or cobble to spawn, and so forth. Those metrics are then scored, rolled up into a composite IBI score, which then gets compared to a threshold, which informs our assessment decisions. So, like I mentioned before, we've just recently completed our first statewide assessment of water quality on at least on the stream side of things. It started in 2006. We finished up our last monitoring in 2017. We're just getting to the point now where we can start to report on these broad statewide trends in, say, the status of stream fish communities. And we have some documents out there. For example, this Clean Water Roadmap that's available on the web, and there's actually been updates to this in 2016 and 2018 that are out there. and we have some metrics we use to basically tell how we're doing. So this Clean Water Roadmap talks about how stream fish are reliable indicators of water quality, and the IBI itself is a useful measure of progress towards meeting those clean water goals. And in 2014, this is a real broad statewide picture of where we are in terms of meeting our goals for stream fish communities. You can see that in the northeastern part of the state, we're nearly 100% in some places of having healthy fish communities. Other places, there's some challenges. There's some some struggles in, for example, southwestern Minnesota. With some of those streams have a lot of water quality challenges that need to be addressed. So this is a way we've developed to track progress towards meeting those clean water goals, and this will be updated over time. So that's pretty much what I'm going to say about the stream side of things. I know Jacqueline has some more detailed information about the lake side of things, and I'm going to pass it off to her here.
Right. So just about everything John said about kind of stream IBI concepts and what we're trying to accomplish is true for lakes as well. So I'm just going to go through a few kind of nuts and bolts that build up our fish IBI, and then I'll talk again kind of similar to how John showed some pictures about kind of the state of the lakes that have been assessed so far. So John went over this, that we use an IBI to evaluate effects of human actions on systems. So the lakes on the left-hand side, showing some shoreline disturbance. In the middle, we've got water quality disturbance, potentially from land use, and then on the right is a lake that obviously looks pretty undisturbed. So when we build IBIs, we build them out of metrics that John showed several examples of that should respond in a predictable way to shoreline disturbance or water quality disturbance or what have you. One of the challenges in Minnesota, true for lakes and streams, is just the kind of wide variety of types of lakes. The size of lakes is, we got huge differences in the size of lakes, huge differences in the kind of natural character of lakes, depth of lakes. Shape of lakes is actually really important when you're thinking about what fish around lake is going to inherently have fewer species of fish. Like a round lake with sandy substrate, that's not very interesting. So you're not going to have as many types of fish species as you would on a lake that has a really kind of jagged shoreline with bays and points and gravel and sand and all sorts of differences. So when we built tools, we had to kind of build different tools for different types of lakes. So similar to John showed that their electrofishing sample with fish IBI sampling in lakes, we used 4 different gears to try to get a picture of the entire fish community. We have developed tools for lakes between 100 and 15,000 acres, and we sample them in the summer months with, I'll go clockwise, starting in the upper left, or counterclockwise, pardon me. We have trap nets, gill nets, electrofishing, and beach spains. And then in the upper right, it shows just an example of a lake that, with some netting locations to kind of give you a picture of how it might be distributed in a given lake. So similar to John said, we have in lakes some pollution intolerant and pollution tolerant species that one of the questions folks often have is, what are you getting out of, maybe looking at the fish and the plants and the bugs that you're not getting by just taking a water quality or a Secchi reading? And the biological community can accumulate stressors over time, and they might integrate stressors that aren't measured with a Secchi disc, for example. And so it's important to have that water quality information and the Secchi and the phosphorus, but it also gives a more complete picture when you have the biology. So this is a slide I kind of pulled from a really technical presentation. So but just to give you kind of a sense, when we build these IBI tools, it's a pretty complex kind of statistics modeling process, but it really comes down to really easy concepts. We try to look at the primary disturbance drivers in lakes, which many researchers have found to be shoreline disturbance and watershed disturbance, and the changes that they make to the habitat in lakes. So the physical structure, which might be the vegetation, the woody habitat, the substrate, which is like sand or gravel or rock, and then the water quality changes, maybe from sedimentation or algae or reductions in oxygen available, or changes, regime shifts is saying, going from a clear water to a kind of algae-dominated or turbid state. So we build up our IBIs and lakes looking at some basic building pieces. So we classify the fish according to their tolerance, according to how they feed. So an insectivore is going to need clearer water to be able to see what it's doing versus an omnivore that might be able to feed off the bottom of the lake and kind of scrounge around. For example, so in our IBI, an insectivore would give you positive points, whereas an omnivore would score negatively. And we look at different metric types, which would be the total number of species, and then also kind of the relative proportions of them. So far, we've built all these tools. As John kind of inferred, we started assessing lakes with the year 2013, so they'd already been a good way, halfway through the assessment cycle when DNR started joining in with the lakes. So this map on the left-hand side just kind of shows our progress to date. So we've assessed 454 lakes and 24 watersheds. Those are shown in the 2 shades of blue. And then in the lavender watersheds, those are watersheds we're currently sampling in that we will be assessing in the coming years. The gray watersheds, most of those watersheds don't have lakes suitable for IBI. If they have a lake, it's too shallow or it's a reservoir. But you'll notice a huge portion of the state in the far northeast where a huge resource of lakes, and that is a portion of lakes that we do not yet have an IBI tool for. The Canadian Shield Lakes, many of them are in the Boundary Waters or Superior National Forest. The fish communities in those lakes are kind of dramatically different. They are shaped by different geological processes, and we also don't have a lot of difference between the lakes. Most of the lakes have very, very little watershed disturbance and very, very little shoreline disturbance. So we're working on an alternate model for those lakes. So just to kind of give you a snapshot of what we found so far, the map on the left just shows the percentage of lakes that have been assessed that were found to support aquatic life. And that's kind of a lingo-y thing. Obviously, a lake supports aquatic life, even if it's full of carp. But under the Clean Water Act, that's the language that's used to kind of say support aquatic life that we would expect, given an absence of stressors.
And has some biological integrity.
Yeah, there we go. You heard John, has biological integrity. So in the northern part of the state, 3/4 or more of the lakes and all of the watersheds have been supporting. And then we've seen in kind of the central part of the state, the metro and the kind of expanded metro area, I guess, a little bit lower percentage. One of the things that folks sometimes wonder is, well, did they ever? And we're really fortunate to have a lot of good historical information on many of the metro lakes in particular, where we have, we had researchers 100 years ago vouchering fish species, so we know that those lakes used to have fish communities very similar to other, lakes around Grand Rapids or Brainerd, and now, it's dramatically different. And then in the southwest part of the state, most of those lakes have been severely impacted by the agricultural land use and resulting eutrophication.
That's why they're all red.
So one of the other things that's important is to not just identify the problems, but to identify the exceptional resources for protection and awareness. And so we've used a model similar to what PCA has done for streams, where we're identifying lakes that are really, truly exceptionally high. One thing to keep in mind is not every lake even has the capacity to do this. If I have a shallow lake, it's not going to ever be exceptional for its fish community. But of the lakes that we've sampled so far, the dark blue would be the highest. So those are Mississippi headwaters, and I'm forgetting what the one to the left of it is. I think it's, I can't remember, I won't speculate. I have the highest percentage, half or more of the lakes are exceptional. And then in green and yellow, we still have a good number. And then in gray, we did not identify any at this point in time. But it's really a high priority of the DNR, in particular, and PCA, to make sure that we protect lakes. We don't want to allow lakes to degrade. We're really fortunate. John and I both work with other states across the country. And one of the common themes is how fortunate we are in Minnesota to have the resources that we have and to have a lot of really, truly lakes and rivers that are in exceptional condition. So this is a lot, and my understanding is this is going to be sent out after the talk, so it might be a little easier to take in when you're looking at it. But I throw it into a lot of presentations. So on the left-hand side, the y-axis, if you're familiar with graphics, it shows the number of lakes that are assessed within each watershed. And then across the bottom, it lists all the watersheds. And I'm kind of going from north to south here. So I'll just pick out the Otter Tail watershed, which is the fourth from the right. In the Otter Tail River watershed, that's the most lakes we've assessed. It was 86 lakes. And of them, about 10 were exceptional, shown in purple. And then another 50 were fully supporting. We had some where we had insufficient information, which typically just means we had scores right around a threshold. And so probably no matter how many times we sampled it, we're not going to get a true signal. It's one that we want to keep an eye on. And then, another 15 or so lakes that are not supporting, and some lakes that we've identified that while they seem like they're doing okay now, we think they're vulnerable and worthy of protection. So you'll see kind of some patterns that as you go from north to south, similar to the maps that I showed. And then I just put a star next to the ones that that we've assessed. I don't know how many people on this call are from the urban Twin Cities metro area, but that seems to be an interest of a lot of folks, kind of like how are our metro lakes doing. We actually haven't yet gone in. We'll be assessing the kind of the heart of the metro in the next couple years here. But the watersheds that have, portions of the metro are starred on this slide. And then I just want to acknowledge a few other folks that, so I came on board in 2011 with this project, but this all started with Melissa Tremmel, who is a researcher who started developing on a small set of lakes, some fish IBI tools back in the 1990s. And so I just listed here some of the folks that have been important to our work. I guess I should have put thank you, John and Jacqueline. John and I weren't perfectly coordinated here. But so this is my contact information. And then our website's a little hard to find. I usually just recommend people Google Minnesota Lake IBI. I think Minnesota Fish IBI works as well, but you might get
You'll probably get the stream.
You'll probably get stream stuff, yeah.
We'll get there eventually.
So Shannon, what do you do next? Open it for questions? Or?
Yeah. Thanks, you guys. That was a really interesting presentation. So now people can feel free to ask questions over the chat if they want. I'll read them out loud so everybody can hear them if you put something through the chat. Or also you can just chime in here and ask your question. You'll need to unmute yourself, so either press *6 or press the little microphone icon by your name in WebEx, and you can ask your questions. So I'll just kind of leave it open and see who would like to ask.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Patrick Plant from Lake Orono. I was just interested in the graph that you showed at the end there. It's not a big deal, but it would seem like it would, to me, make more sense to put the lakes that are vulnerable in order before the lakes that are, I guess, in greater trouble or already not supporting. Just from a threshold standpoint, it would seem like that would be a middle ground.
Sure, you are correct that the vulnerable lakes tend to score between the fully supporting and the not supporting lakes.
Yeah, I mainly ask it too just to make sure I was understanding what was being said. But anyway, thank you. Very interesting presentation, though. So.
Sure, thanks.
And to kind of follow up on his question, someone else had a question wondering if there's a sufficient budget to, it kind of went away 1 second here. Is there a sufficient budget to address vulnerable lake remediation?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and John and I are not experts on the implementation side of this. We're kind of the scientists that build the tools. But there is, hundreds of millions of dollars that have been spent on implementation projects with the Clean Water Funds for lakes and streams since those became available. One of the primary agencies that works on those grant projects is the Board of Water and Soil Resources. And so there's as you would expect with this process, there's a lot of machinery and moving parts, but the list of vulnerable lakes is important for folks that are making decisions about funding. We want to protect, it's a high priority for DNR and PCA to keep those lakes from becoming impaired. You want to say something else, John?
No, that's what I was going to say is the funding mechanisms for doing restoration projects are increasingly emphasizing restoration of impaired waters and protection of waters that are at risk. So, we're trying to move away from what, in the past had been more of a, well, we'll work with whoever is interested in working with us, even if the quality of the system they're working on is, really bad or really good. And now there tends to be a little more emphasis now on dealing with those waters where those investments might have the greatest ability to flip a lake or a stream from impaired to not impaired, or keep something that's at risk from becoming impaired. That's becoming an increasing emphasis.
Okay, great. So the next question that someone had was wondering how Line 3 might impact our watersheds, and what can we do to protect our waters from the pipeline?
Yeah, I don't work with the Line 3 project at all. I really am kind of underinformed about it myself.
So I can just mention that I am also not involved intimately with the environmental review and all of the processes with Line 3. I know I did have a request for Lake IBI scores associated with, lakes that would be near the pipeline, but that's kind of my extent of my familiarity. Certainly on a broader conceptual stream and lake IBI, information is used as part of environmental review. If we've documented, for example, population of one example might be Pugno shiner, which is a threatened species in Minnesota that we find in some lakes with particularly exceptional habitat quality. In some cases, if there was a proposal for a marina or something like that, you know, the fish IBI information is used on that local scale to try to minimize impact to high-quality habitat.
Okay. Another question somebody was wondering if they saw rock bass listed in the pollution intolerant species that you had up.
Yeah, they are one of our more intolerant and sensitive species for lakes. They require clearer, colder water than many other species. I think.
Yeah, we consider them pollution sensitive, which is like a shade below our intolerant category. But yeah, in general, we consider rock bass to be a very positive sign in terms of water quality.
Okay.
There's some surprises. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was going to move on to the next question, so if you had another comment.
One of the concepts that I didn't throw in here is just kind of like, it's surprising sometimes for folks that, you know, there are, for instance, some, you know, traditional game fish species that are really habitat dependent, you know, for, you know, so, you know, rock bass might be a surprising species for folks. But for instance, northern pike, which, you know, up in northern Minnesota, we sort of take for granted, in the southern part of the state, where we have a lot of disconnected wetlands and a lot of poor water quality, it's unusual to find a healthy population of northern pike in a lake. And so so there's some game fish that kind of can indicate, whereas some other game fish, you know, are just, you know, kind of tolerant of being wherever they are. But it's important to kind of separate out that we're not just, you know, John and I aren't just talking about like fish that people, you know, are wanting to take home for dinner. It's kind of the whole community.
Great. Well, so someone had a question about what collaboration with various agencies is taking place, and do you know what they're doing in a similar arena? So we've kind of spoken a bit about, like, this is the PCA and the DNR are kind of working side by side on a lot of these water quality and IBI assessments, so we definitely talk to each other. Are there any other agencies that you guys could reference that we are working with in these areas?
We work with the Border Water Soil Resources. As I mentioned, they do implementation, and there's a lot of the on-the-ground projects are managed through them. The money kind of routes through them. And so we provide all of our information, and we will provide review as they request on, you know, which lakes we think, based on the fish IBI or which streams are good candidates. And then there's other parts, you know, that are more peripherally attached to what John and I do, but are certainly the whole, you know, kind of monitoring and implementation, that slide that John showed at the beginning that had that cycle, is involving folks, you know, from the Metropolitan Council, involving folks from the Department of Health, Department of Agriculture. I'm sure I'm missing some.
Well, yeah, and besides state agencies, we have a lot of partners at the local scale, whether it's counties, watershed districts. We work with tribes quite a bit. And then even, you know, federal agencies who work with the Forest Service when we're monitoring water bodies that are in national forests. Not a lot of national parkland in Minnesota, but to get back to the local partners, you know, the watershed districts and the counties are really a critical local partner. They're the ones who are carrying out a lot of the implementation work on the ground, and you know, they're really important partners in all this work. A lot of times they don't have the monitoring capacity to do the data collection, and that's where we're kind of tasked with the broad scale data collection. But in terms of getting that work done, restoring these waters and implementing protection plans, it's the counties and the watershed districts that are doing a lot of that work. And, you know, lake associations too. That's obviously a great source of partnerships.
Good. That kind of follows up on another question that somebody had. Then they were asking about the city level and helping to build out some lake quality data, or are we more just focusing on sort of a statewide scale? And we definitely have a statewide monitoring plan. But how much do we work with cities, or is that more kind of we work with counties and SWCDs, and then they kind of work with cities? What's sort of the train of connecting with cities that you know about?
Well, we've done some things in cities that have, personally I work mostly in northern Minnesota, so I can't speak a lot to the metro area. I know we've had some good partnerships with the city of Duluth. They have a lot of, urban trout streams there that our monitoring and assessment work has helped them prioritize, seeking funding for different projects they're doing to improve water quality or habitat. We've been talking to the city of Brainerd here about a stream that has a lot of stormwater impacts, but seems to have some really good potential, trying to mitigate some of those impacts from stormwater to get it delisted. It's currently on the impaired waters list because of a poor fish community, but it seems to have a lot of potential. And the city is redoing some streets and some storm sewers and things like that. We're trying to work with them to implement some infrastructure that might result in water quality improvements. So that's kind of what I know of. I'm sure in the metro area there's all sorts of stuff.
There's all sorts, yeah. So one of my slides, I didn't really touch on it, but one of the things that we do after we, let's say we list a lake as vulnerable to impairment or as not supporting and impaired, we go through a process where we try to say, well, why? Like, it's important if I'm going to have a project, but I want to be addressing the correct why question. It's called stressor identification. And what we found is, particularly in the metro, you have a lot of consultants, you have a lot of cities, you have a lot of folks working together who can kind of pick up a lot of that from the why and secure the expertise and the funds to work on projects. So in the metro, I guess, is the primary spot where I've seen kind of cities and watershed districts being the most engaged, but it varies from lake to lake, and I'm sure stream to stream.
Great. The next question somebody had, they were hoping you guys could just touch on the silver carp that are being found, and I guess our concerns for the extent of their presence in the state.
We're pointing at each other in the room here. So they're not, it's not an area I'm an expert on. I know that DNR has done a large-scale kind of review of connections. So there's, concerns about connections. Actually, everyone's thinking about the Mississippi and the St. Croix, but actually we have a lot of connections down in the southwestern part of the state with Iowa, where some of the, I can't remember actually now if it's silver or big head or both that are coming up through those, have the potential to come up through those connections. And DNR has a pretty large program that's funded through the LCCMR, so that lottery proceeds that specifically kind of tracking fish movement, including silver carp and big head carp. They're tagged and they try to recover them after the project to try to look at that, and undoubtedly, those species similar to the common carp, which was introduced so much longer ago, would have impacts on water quality just based on their life history behaviors. You have any more detail, John?
Yeah, the only other thing I'll add is that for large rivers in the state, we have a slightly different monitoring approach. We monitor the entirety of each large river. I think there's 7 of them in the state. There's the Minnesota, the Mississippi, the St. Croix, the Rainy, and the Red. I don't know if I count all of them, but anyways, we do those rivers in a systematic way all in a single year. So we monitored the Mississippi River in 2013, the Minnesota in 2015, I want to say, the St. Croix in 2016. So, and we do those on a 10-year recurring interval. So that would provide some information about, you know, potential spread of invasive species because of the systematic nature of those surveys up and down a river system in the same year when they do come up for the monitoring year.
Okay, thank you. Another question that somebody had was they were wondering, I think we've listed one or two websites, but they were wondering, is there a description of the specific results from these IBI surveys on lakes in particular? Can you like just go to the DNR's website and actually see what the results are? Or are they more in a larger report to be downloaded somewhere?
So on our website, those maps that I showed that kind of showed percent by watershed, those maps are on our Fish IBI website. Beyond that, you'd have to go into Lake Finder, which is on our website on the main page on the left-hand side. There's a link that says Lake Finder, and then you could type in your individual lake, and if it had been recently sampled, in the discussion, it would talk about the Fish IBI result. We don't have individual, those are the two ways that we break it down. The other thing that is online are the stressor ID reports. So for all watersheds that were assessed in the last few years, we have a report that goes through not just it gives the status of all the lakes. And similarly, and that is on PCA's website, actually. You know, this is all data we're providing to PCA. And similarly, in the watershed reports, which are on PCA's website, it would break down the lakes. The easiest thing might be to just email me or something like that, rather than go on a web hunt, and I can point you to make sure you're using your time constructively.
That sounds good. Okay, another question. What can you recommend a lake association do with limited but fairly significant dollars to enhance or aid their fish population?
You know, it's going to be so lake specific. So not every lake has the same issues. So some lakes that we've assessed, we've identified as a limiting factor, the shoreline habitat quality. And so if that is identified as a limiting factor, then shoreline buffers and leaving wood that falls in the lakes to provide habitat, not removing excessive amounts of aquatic plants, those kinds of things can be important. If it's a problem that's coming from elsewhere and coming into the lake from a ditch or from septic or what have you, then you want to, direct your resources to where the problem is. So I think that, it would be important to talk to either you can start with either DNR or PCA. We work super closely together. It doesn't really matter who you talk to first. And we can help individuals know what information we have available. Maybe we have some good information available already. And then, or if there's a lack of information, if there's plans to address that.
Yeah, and watershed, like I've said before, watershed districts and counties are often a really good resource too. Sometimes they have programs specifically oriented towards, best management practices in lakes. They might have, I know up here the Crow Wing County SWCD does some shoreline restoration work in partnership with private citizens. So that's another resource to consider if those organizations are available to you.
Great. Another question here. How does Minnesota Public Health interface with regards to safety of fish consumption?
Yeah, so the Minnesota Department of Health is the lead agency, I believe, on fish consumption, but DNR and PCA are also involved. One of the main ways we're involved is that we collect all the fish during our surveys and provide them to the Department of Health to test for various contaminants. You know, the main contaminant of concern in most of Minnesota is mercury, although parts of Minnesota can have PCBs, and then there's a lot of newer contaminants that people are concerned with, flame retardants, contaminants, microplastics are something people are starting to think about. And so the Department of Health has probably the best website, I guess, on the issue of fish consumption, and gives pretty specific guidelines on kind of amount that are safe to eat if you're a child versus, you know, a woman of childbearing age versus an adult male. And then you can connect if there's like one lake that you're interested in on Lake Finder. Again, when you pull up that survey information, it will have any information on contamination results that have been done for an individual lake. I don't know, how do they find it on streams?
Streams, the stream information is all compiled in the watershed reports that PCA produces. There might be other sources through Department of Health, but the cycle one of the watershed approach, we've been including stream by stream contaminant information, fish contaminant information in those watershed reports that you can find just by searching MPCA Crow Wing River watershed. That would probably bring you right to that report for whatever watershed you live in.
Great. So it looks like we've gone through all of our questions on the chat session, but if anybody would like to type anything in, we can wait a few minutes, or if anybody wants to just speak up over the phone and ask a question, we've got another few minutes to do so. So I'll just put it out there for just a second and see if anyone's got anything else. Okay. Well, thank you so much both to John and Jacqueline. This was really interesting. I learned a lot about what's going on in the world of fish monitoring and IBI. So we really appreciate you guys taking the time to put this presentation together and talk with us and answer all of our questions. And just so everybody knows, again, this is will be recorded, so I will send out a link to the presentation, and it will include the question and answer session as well. And if you have any follow-up questions that you think of after offline and you would like answered, feel free to let me know, or feel free to get in touch with Jacqueline or John directly as well, and hopefully they can answer your questions. But thank you again to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and then the water exchange sessions will pick back up again in the fall. So we take a summer break, and while everybody's out doing the monitoring and enjoying being outside, so we will start our sessions back up again in November. All right, thanks again, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.